1, 2, 3. Cool.
Thank you, Case. Thank you for all the work you do. Remember that I love Case more than Case loves Case.
That's not hard.
Just to stay on brand, really.
Yeah, so this is actually going to be... All right, let's see how this goes. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to another Past Podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as it has been the case for the last couple of years, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi!
And today we are launching our series of retrospectives on the early episodes of Another Pass, which is why I mentioned for the last couple of years, because it's going to be a while before we get to when Sam actually joined the show, because the show ran for 4 years before that.
It had a solid run, and we're going to go over all of it, basically.
Yeah. So we figured that this would be a good way to, one, put out something that people can get on the off weeks for our show. And also, I had noticed that a lot of podcast players have limits on how many episodes back they'll allow you to scroll to. So, like, for example, on my phone, I could not listen to any of the first 50 episodes because there was a 100-episode limit. So it seemed like a good time to polish off some of the old episodes, see what still worked, see what we thought about them. Particularly on these early ones, we'll get kind of a sense of, like, me figuring out my shit.
Yeah, what the format really will be.
Yeah, especially for this one, because, oh my god. Yeah, so today we're going to be looking at the first episode, which is Return of the Jedi, and because this was a spin-off of Certain Point of View, we wanted it to be Star Wars, but we also wanted to have it feel like a thing people were already checking into the podcast for. So it also made sense for Ben and Addy, the hosts of Certain POV, to be my guests for that episode. So we wanted this first episode to feel like a Certain Point of View episode, but I'm the host now. And it made sense to do it that way, I feel.
Yeah. No, it is a great episode in the fact that it feels like it's an episode of, like, Crossfire, where everyone's just kind of yelling at each other. And also, I will say that I think people have listened to this podcast before, especially a few episodes back. I do not get down with Ewok hate, and I'm gonna disclaimer: there is a lot of Ewok hate in this episode.
Yeah,
not cool with it. But we'll get into it.
Yeah. I mean, so we don't need to have too much of a preamble. I think we're doing this the same way we did the proto episodes of Another Pass, that were just full on episodes of Certain Point of View, and we'll be getting into all of these episodes when we decided to spin them off. So this is the first official episode of Another Pass, which is Return of the Jedi, and that is cool, but it is also intentional. Like, we deliberately chose to do a Star Wars thing because the show was spinning off of Certain Point of View, and initially was on the Certain Point of View feed. So it was like, it was expected that it would be Star Wars related at this point. Certain Point of View had not fully branched out into, like, broader nerd pop culture stuff, and with some exceptions, I think we had probably done a few, like, oh, this movie just came out, here are our thoughts, kind of episodes.
Right.
So there was very much a vibe of, like, well, let's make it explicitly Star Wars for the first one, and that will help it feel like a good transition from a different show.
Yeah. A nice little bridge.
But let's get into it. The listeners, you should all appreciate that while there's, like, a little bit of, like, you can hear mic issues where, like, cables are being pressed on because we were all in the room together. It's the kind of scenario where you get a little bit of static from just, like, something, like, interfering with a microphone. The sound quality is pretty good, which will not be the case for all the episodes we're looking back on. But this one's okay.
Yeah.
So enjoy.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Thanks, folks, for tuning in to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and today we're talking about Return of the Jedi. Now, with me is
Ben Milton
and
Addy Thomas. Thank you guys for joining us. This is sort of a little bit of a spinoff of our Certain Point of View podcast. We had, Case, you introduced a great idea to us of how to, like, reviewing the Star Wars prequels and kind of pitching what we would do to change it. And actually tell us how that idea started.
Well, it just started off as a game that I'd play with friends of mine while we were working in theater stuff. We'd be doing physical labor, like hanging lights and stuff, and just free to talk about our shared nerd pursuits. So shout out to Jeff Moonen, who was my partner in crime in all of this, and we like would brainstorm how we do movies better, or how we take movies that were great and make them even more amazing. And in this case, we're going to talk about Return of the Jedi, which is a movie that we all agree is good. It's part of the original Star Wars trilogy. It's a good movie. You know, when I was a kid, I loved it more than Empire. It's a good movie, but it is not great. Right. It is not the best of the originals. It has some glaring flaws. It's
arguably the weakest of the originals.
Yeah, some people would argue that that's where like you could start to see the Lucas problems creeping in. Like, I don't know if I'd go that far, but there's definitely a few things where you can feel it's a different type of movie than the first two. Like the first one is this wonderful hero's journey, and the second movie is this cool, dark twisting of that parable. The third one does a really good job of being like, here's the closure we wanted, but it stumbles at a few spots. So I've got some thoughts on where it stumbles and what we could do to make it better. What about you guys?
Well, I think that's the great thing about this is, we had so much fun doing this on Certain Point of View that we were able to spin it off into a whole completely different show, because you could do this with every movie, and that's what I love about this idea. And I'm so glad you're running with it, Case, because you're perfect to do this show, and I'm glad you're hosting it.
All right, thank you.
I think that with Return of the Jedi, there's a lot of problems that I have with this film overall, now that I'm an adult. Like you, when I was a kid, I think I really liked this film. It wasn't my favorite. I've always been a huge fan of Empire Strikes Back. Like, that's always been my number one film. Star Wars right behind it, because it was the very first movie I ever saw in a movie theater with my mom, and I was a little kid, and it was just overwhelming and beautiful, and I was in a balcony seat front row. Like, you couldn't ask for a better introduction to Star Wars.
That's amazing. You're also really old.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dick. But with Jedi, like I was perfectly. It was also in a highlighted time for me where I was like really into action figures and G.I. Joe, and so like I was really into the commercialism, and Jedi does a great job of cashing in on that.
Oh yeah, it feels like so 80s in certain regards. Like G.I. Joe's a great example. It's that 80s action movie kind of hero's victory. Like, I think that's the reason I dug it more when I was young, where it is the closure. It's the winning thing. He defeats Vader. He defeats Palpatine. Emperor. Like, Luke is such a cool hero. And there's like battles with like nature monsters and these walking robot things, which like we got more of it than we did in Empire. Like, that's the there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of things to really latch onto, and that's really cool. But it's just not narratively as strong.
Narratively, it's a lot weaker.
Yeah, and I was sort of the same. My experience for the longest time, Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars movie, and I think a lot of that's because I felt like the payoff was good enough,
And you love the Ewoks.
I do. I love Ewoks.
God damn it, Addy.
I still love Ewoks. I'm sorry.
I don't hate Ewoks. Yeah. We'll talk about them later. You want to hear something kind of funny, though, about the Jedi versus Empire thing? So when the video games were coming out, and this was, well after the movies had come out. So this was the Super Nintendo series of like Star Wars games. And like the first one was really good. Like they were pretty good games. Like you run around with a lightsaber. It's hard to make that bad. Well, I guess that's not true. They've been some pretty bad shit.
They've done it.
But on a 2D playing field, it's
for its time, it was pretty impressive.
So I remember seeing the ad in GamePro for when they announced the Return of the Jedi, or like Super Return of the Jedi for Super Nintendo. And the ad was, the first time you won, the second time they won. Now it all comes on to this. And that was the first time where I realized, oh my God, the Empire did win in Empire Strikes Back. Like, in my like child head, because like I was like 7, like just was like, oh, all media heroes win every time. And like for whatever reason I was just like, well, they got away and everything's fine. Like, yeah, sure, Han got captured, but like, that's a win regardless.
Right.
And I'm like, how did I ever think that? Like,
your whole world just collapsed around you.
I was like, oh my God, my brain's exploding. And this is all thanks to the ad for the video game adaptation on Super Nintendo of Return of the Jedi.
And I think that's probably probably like what's warped me as a person is like my pure glee that the Empire won in that movie.
Yeah, see, I still don't feel that way. I don't have glee
love
that the Empire
I love that.
I love that they can make a movie like that. That's
that's
the
bold
thing that's
enough
really
It
to
was
cool.
do
so ballsy
Yeah.
for its
Yeah.
time.
Absolutely.
And that actually is one of my notes when we get into like the nitty gritty. But I think we touched on one of the problems that I think people usually touch on, which is Ewoks. Like there's some roughness there. And the other one I think is the Death Star. People reference how it's like, oh, they made another Death Star, to the point where like it has now tainted the franchise that when they made The Force Awakens, they had to do another Death Star.
Right.
Like sure, Star Killer base, but it's another Death
Yeah,
Star. Like
it
they had to do
really
a trench run, they had to do all of that. Like the fact that the like broader story idea that Lucas had was like climax is a Death Star and they have like animals on the planet, or however true that story he told is. It feels weird that they didn't modify it when we got to the actual final chapter. Like that we shot our load on the Death Star in the first one and we got Chewbacca floating around in space already. So what are we going to do? We'll cut them in half and call them Ewoks, and we'll have a Death Star that's like not quite finished. Okay, cool. Moving on. Like both of those are my two big problems. And what are your thoughts on both of those?
I think, yeah.
Let's start with Ewoks.
Oh, start with Ewoks? Yeah. No goddamn Ewoks. Just none. Totally unneeded. It's an unneeded plot device that doesn't help tell the story at all. In fact, all it does is diminish the story overall. And I know you're already rolling your eyes at it, but think about this: like they fought their way out of the Death Star, like in the first movie, you know, and they're like running from the stormtroopers, and like there's real peril involved in that.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to Return of the Jedi, and the stormtroopers are taken down by a bunch of fucking teddy bears.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That completely like that diminishes the terror and the fear and the need to be scared of stormtroopers.
But
it diminishes them. I think there's no way around that. I'm sorry. There's nothing you're going to say that's even going to come close to making.
Well,
any
first
sense.
off, you've actually admitted defeat at one point in this argument because you tried. You showed me images of Ewoks being terrorizing. And fear.
Yeah,
fearsome.
but that's not what we got in the fucking movie.
Hold on,
though.
let's unpack this for a second, because there's two things you were looking at. One is the actual Ewok that we got, like the little teddy bear creature, and the other is what the role they played in the story. And I feel that those are two separate things. I think the teddy bear part of it is probably there so they could sell it to kids, and they could do a spin-off cartoon and other movies. And
the teddy bear part, absolutely commercialism. But I think the role they played is, and I understand, yes, Wookiee planet, absolutely, that would have been cool.
Well, because here's the thing. We saw the extreme version of this in the Phantom Menace then when they go to the Gungans. Like, that's where it, like, clearly it's just a giant misstep. Like, where it's like, okay, we found the natives and they're going to be our distraction and, like, our allies in this whole thing. And it shows us uniting as people together. And that's the Lucas ideal. Like, that's kind of a cool thing. And
and it's also the idea. I think it's a bigger idea than that. And yes, you could have accomplished this with Wookiees if they were willing to spend the money on that. But for me, the Ewoks are charming. Yes, it's a kid thing. It works for me. But the whole idea of them not being able to take down the Empire, the whole point of that is that the Empire is cocky and wasn't prepared for a battle like that.
That's ridiculous.
But they had discounted the native peoples there because there was nothing galvanizing them against the Empire until the Rebel Alliance.
But the problem with that idea, though, is that the Empire was expecting problems there.
Not from the Ewoks, though.
They set the whole trap. Like
they set the trap for the rebels, but not for the Ewoks.
What that is such a horrible argument. Like
we're
prepared for guys with laser guns and giant Wookiees with bowcasters, but definitely not prepared for a 3.5-foot midget bear with a bow and arrow.
They weren't prepared for Red Squadron in the original.
Yes, but this time they
and
are
it was
prepared.
Against
they
odds.
laid a trap. They laid the whole idea of this Death Star is that they're laying.
I think we need to refer people to the Ewok episode of Certain Point of View. It's one of the first few episodes because I don't want to get bogged down in an Ewok debate.
This is true. We don't need to retread it too much. Here's the thing. The Ewoks do have, like, shades of Vietnam. It's the same way Aliens had this element of, like, highly trained military people showing up, native population or sort of savage population, taking them out because they don't expect it. There is this element of American culture from the 80s where it's like lone people in the woods. Like, this is a time where a lot of videos were being put out about, like, swamp fox during the American Revolution. There's a lot of conversation.
Well, Lucas was one of the wrote one of the original scripts for helped write one of the original scripts for Apocalypse Now, and it was told from the point of view of the Viet Cong. So this is sort of like his retconning of the Viet Cong story into...
it's taking cultural elements and pulling it in. Yeah, like, here's my thoughts with the Ewoks to make it a little more palatable, because I think the way they're introduced is... they're too soft, except for, like, the detail that they're cannibals. Like... Well,
not cannibals. They eat humans.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, they're flesh-eating monsters.
It's a fine line, my friend.
Well, they're not eating themselves.
Because kind of what
that we know of.
Kind of the joke what they're doing is similar to what happens in Galaxy Quest when they have, like, the aliens that look like children, except for these guys are still supposed to be our friends. So what's going on there? Like, they look like teddy bears that aren't monsters but are monsters. Yeah. I don't know about that. Maybe if they, like, looked a little more competent to begin with, like, they still, like, because we'd still underestimate
them for laughs.
Yeah, like, they're too cute. Like, we would still underestimate them because they're savages and they could still be smaller than humans and only have sticks. But combined with maybe the moon had a few more than just, like, a small squadron. Like, maybe there was a guerrilla war going on before the final battle gets into play. Like, where there's...
And the rebels show up and kind of bolster their forces.
Well, maybe maybe there were rebels already there.
Oh, yeah. See, and that's how I would rewrite it. I would rewrite it with, they know that they've got to blow up this shield to get to the Emperor, to stop him. So I would send Luke, Chewie, and Leia down in a small squad to fight the shield, to take down the shield. And you just need the rebels. Like, the rebels are, like, if you frame the fight as sort of like a last-ditch, desperate effort to kill Palpatine and end the war. Like, you already have overwhelming odds against a small force of just trying to keep it together group of people. I don't think you need to have an indigenous, quote unquote, primitive people to tell that story. You
think it muddies the water?
I don't think it muddies the water. I just don't think it's necessary. I think that you can tell that story without having to do that, and just make it a lot smoother. Because now you're staying with your main heroes. You're staying with the idea of what's happening in that action with them instead of following Wicket, around the forest. I think that just makes a better, more compelling story for your heroes.
See, I feel that having them there, though, is still part of this theme. That, like, if you get, like what Addy was saying, like, if you get cocky, that's how you fall. Otherwise, the rebels would have no chance against the Empire, because the Empire, in terms of actual abilities, is clearly going to win.
Yeah, but see, that's completely discounted, though, by the Ewoks. Like, because they're so primitive, they shouldn't have a chance. Like, they literally have.
Well,
no
what I'm saying is
their
presence.
We've seen that in history happen, though. Like, what?
Not to that degree.
What we're talking about is the portrayal of the Ewoks versus the role the Ewoks are meant to play. If the Ewoks were a little more effective and had a few more things going on for them, and were more bolstered by rebel forces, maybe that would make it
more believable.
Yeah, more believable. Like, if they were showing the rebels where things were that were advantages, and rebels were combining their technology and ingenuity with the Ewoks' knowledge of the land and terrain, and
instead of the Ewoks
resources,
just sweeping in.
Yeah, exactly. The Ewoks are a force unto themselves in this, and as a result, it's unbelievable because, like, oh man, they just took out an ATST. Like, how did that happen? That doesn't make any sense.
They happen to have logs swung up.
Well,
into the
exactly.
trees.
Those are crazy. But if the Ewoks knew more about the terrain and that there were, like, say, certain mosses that could catch on fire and that could be used for some sort of explosive, or that there were things that had tensile strength.
The problem with that idea, though, is that you end up getting like a half-hour explanation about who the Ewoks are. Like,
you don't have to do that. You just show a brief moment of an Ewok, like, helping a rebel soldier, like, grab this moss, setting it on fire.
Yeah, or the way that their cities are suspended in the trees are based on, like, a type of vine that's just really, really strong. Like it only requires like one or two details that they use.
It's just like show
like
don't tell.
I'm not saying like I'm
as-
throwing out a lot of ideas. Like maybe they knew about underground tunnels, but like they don't have to use all of them. I'm just saying like take one or two, figure out how to have them make sense for the story. Like maybe the Ewoks actually go underneath and into the base while the rebels are like doing the distraction.
Iwo Jima style underground tunnel network.
So everyone's trying to fool everyone. Like those could all be kind of cool things. So basically, I think I'm in favor of the role of the Ewoks in this movie. I just think the execution is the beta test for ultimately the Gungans. And that's the problem.
Troubling.
Yeah. Like that, I think the Ewoks is one of the areas where you can feel like the type of fan servicey, marketing driven stuff that will later dominate the prequels.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think they're necessary. I think that.
But you're also a clear fan of the Empire too. Let's just make that clear.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think the Empire is incredible. Without the Empire, you don't have a really compelling story.
Yeah, I agree. The stakes have to be high, otherwise it doesn't matter. Like that's
Right.
one of the
And
problems
if-
with
yeah.
like the Phantom Menace. Like they don't do a good job explaining the stakes for why this battle is so important. Like for why anything has to happen the way it does. Like the fact that it comes down to Darth Maul versus two Jedi is never explained. It should have been a
Right.
ton of Jedi there. Like why is it this thing? The Empire was such a great job of setting up those stakes. So I do agree with Ben. Like we have to do everything we can to keep that up there. On that note, let's talk about the Death Star.
I don't want another Death Star. I think that was a poor choice. I think that I like the idea of Palpatine being there and laying the trap,
Right.
and them knowing that Palpatine is there. But you could have easily have done that just having a base there that's protected with with a fleet of ships. And so my idea would have been to just have it discovered that this is where Palpatine's at. We have one chance to kill him. The rebellion is on its last legs after the beatings that it took from Empire Strikes Back in the years after that, leading into Jedi. And so it's sort of a last-ditch effort to stop the war and win the war is by taking out Palpatine on this base floating above a planet.
Yeah, what if it was a base that was creating those super Star Destroyers? Like Vader's, was it
Like
Executor?
shipyards or
Yeah, a
something,
shipyard
yeah.
like that. That was like, I mean,
sure.
it'd be kind of the plot of KOTOR, where if they had some sort of, like they had developed some sort of thing that would allow them to mass produce not just Star Destroyers, but super Star Destroyers, like truly terrifying weapons that were far more advanced than what the Rebels had been dealing with before.
Right.
So that would actually kind of work, and it would be very similar, because like the Death Star never actually has a super weapon. Like it has a cannon that blows up a ship, which is cool, but it's not a planet destroying laser. So the actual firepower of it is actually kind of irrelevant. Like if they think it's an undefended, aside from the fleet that's around it and ship and force field, and then they realize like, oh no, those things are actually like gun turrets. Like they thought that was like the energy source, but they could actually shoot energy from it. Like that would have the same effect.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never really put that much thought into necessarily the second Death Star. I've always kind of liked it for certain reasons. But I like your guys' ideas a lot, and I could definitely it doesn't take much convincing to move me to those ideas.
What did you like about the idea that there was a second Death Star?
The reasons the second Death Star does work for me is so there's a little bit of hope and confidence already within the rebellion that they've taken something down like this before and that they can do it again. And then the fact that
that's true, and that is one thing I do like about it being the Death Star, but I don't know if that's strong enough. But go on, yeah.
And then you have the idea of it partially constructed, so again, that adds to that level of confidence that they can take this down. So then to find out that it is operational, and this trap is set, it is a big moment that I really enjoy. So that's why the Death Star does work for me in that scenario. But I could easily see it changed out for anything that still lulls them into a sense of false security. That's the only role that the second Death Star feels. And of course, knowing the magnitude of what this weapon can do, it's sort of in a way, it's a cheap storytelling device that saves a lot of time from having to build up the threat of a new super weapon or technology. So it's really, and this is actually my big complaint about Return of the Jedi, is it feels like there's a lot of story crammed into one movie that needed to happen in another 2 or 3 movies for me.
Well, I don't know if that part's true, because Well, all right. My first line.
But
I
I'll
completely
take you down
agree.
another road,
I
so.
completely agree that the trap component, like the it's a trap part, is actually huge because up until that point, the Empire for the most part is brute force. Like they've had some cunning moments, like they follow the rebels back to Yavin 4, and like Vader is really good at Vader has unto himself, but for the most part, the Empire as a whole is perceived as like this like onslaught of power and strength, but not necessarily cunning. And the first time you actually deal with the Emperor, all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's way smarter than everyone. Like we haven't dealt with him before because you guys aren't that big of a threat yet, but now you've pissed him off, and he's brilliant. And like he'll lead you into a trap and just destroy you. Like that part is really cool, and that makes the Emperor so much more compelling as a villain than he would have been if he was just like Hitler being like, "I'm going to attack." Like
Right.
it wouldn't have worked.
I think that there's a way that they could have fixed a couple problems to get to that point. So I'm going to back up earlier in the movie. I don't. Han should have died in that.
Yeah.
I would have killed Han on Tatooine.
And I actually totally agree with you on that. I would have also made that first half. One of the problems I have with this movie. Sorry, and I'll turn it back over to you. I'm sorry, but you have like there's this one half of the movie that's Tatooine and Jabba, and then the other half. It's very clunky in its structure.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say when you were like, too much is crammed in. I'm like, well, but really, there's only two things that happen.
Two stories, yeah.
And the first one is sort of like a little bit of a, hey, the gang's all getting back together. Let's go save the day, which sort of makes the second part better and worse at the same time.
So you can bridge those two with the death of Han.
Right.
If the Empire is involved and knows that there's going to be a rescue attempt on Han and tries to sabotage that rescue attempt in the process and sends, I don't know, Boba Fett along, and actually Han ends up dying at the hands of Boba Fett in order to save Luke or Leia, and in the process they learn that the Emperor is at this one spot. You now have Leia, who's grief-stricken and revenge-motivated, to lead the rebellion into a foolhardy move to try to attack Palpatine, to enact revenge for the death of Han, which I think now bridges those two events.
And adds a recklessness to it.
Yeah, and adds recklessness of a Skywalker into the story. And I think that makes sense. I don't know that I would have made her a Skywalker, but
And
that's actually a thing I have to say. Yeah. All right, let's talk about that one because
that was always clunky.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's
it was
horribly done.
completely retconned.
I think it is dumb. Like we have 33 years to get used to it. And we have all this expanded media, and then that all got wiped away, and then we have more expanded media working with that.
But that's the interesting thing. I remember I read something that sort of, well, there were supposed to be 3 more movies after this, and they were playing with the imagery of Luke going to the dark side, but never really moved him there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of that at the beginning, but
yeah, and that was always a problem. And then Leia is like, it felt like, well, that we teased that there's another Skywalker, so we want to wrap this thing up, guys.
No, but they didn't. That was added.
There's another,
but they didn't say Skywalker.
Well, right, but that's true. That's true. But what I was,
wasn't that something that they didn't put in the original cut?
No,
I thought that was added for special edition.
No,
not saying it. I'm not saying that it was a CGI thing, but I thought that was not in the cut. The same way that like the scene with Jabba in the first one was shot, they just didn't use him, and then they CGI'd in.
Is that so? Gary Kurtz, who had produced it with Lucas, the original 3 with Lucas, had said there was sort of a split with the cast and crew, and so while there were supposed to be 3 more movies after it, what happened is, because of the divorce with George and Marcia Lucas, that they stopped.
It just died in its...
So they decided to rush the ending of this story and kind of compact it, because Boba was supposed to be the bad guy of
the later stuff,
right? And Luke potentially would have killed Vader there and fallen to the dark side, and then this other Skywalker would come, and it would be a totally new character,
or just other person,
right? Well, it was sort of hinted at another Skywalker still,
but it wasn't intended to be Leia,
right?
Yeah, I guess. All right, so let's talk about the Leia thing. I don't think it does anything for the movie Return of the Jedi.
Right. No.
Like, whether it does anything for later stuff is a totally unrelated point. Like, that, I think it was just poorly handled and doesn't do anything, so why even have it? Like, I think the biggest thing it does is it actually makes the relationship with Han weaker, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, she really loves Luke, but they're related, so I guess she's with Han. Like, I mean, it's the idea is to set it up that
should we not do incest in space? Is that a thing?
It is actually a very Lensman thing.
Yeah.
If they wanted to tie it in with that bit of sci-fi universe stuff, but I think
Works in Game of Thrones.
No, it doesn't work. It's wrong even there.
every Targaryen is either brilliant or mad or both.
Could work for Skywalkers.
All right, so I think we just agree, like, just ditch Leia as it.
She doesn't need to be a Skywalker.
I mean, there could be a hint of just someone else just being out there with some Force stuff, and that could have been just introduced in there.
Yeah.
It could have been Chewbacca.
It could have been anybody. Chewbacca as a Jedi would be pretty bad.
Lobaka.
As long as it's not lumpy. There is another. It's lumpy.
Oh, God. You know what? Never mind. There's not.
Yeah, it just awkwardly forces the canonicity of the Christmas special.
Oh, you bastards. Just to sell
We have saved Return of the Jedi. Unfortunately, we've destroyed the franchise.
Actually, that's something I need to ask you. What would be worse, Ewoks or making the holiday special canon?
Oh, the holiday special.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed there.
Yeah. That's
So
just
here's a
awful.
thought about you brought up.
Think about it though.
Yeah, I know.
You brought up like Luke kind of looking like he's going towards the dark side at the
Yes.
beginning, which those first couple scenes have that in there. And I was thinking about this one. So Luke, I don't feel is suffering the type of PTSD that he should be from the fallout of Empire. I think that maybe that is the thing, the through line that should carry him into this battle, which we don't get. I think he shouldn't have a lightsaber at first. They kind of tease us with that, but then that moment when R2 pops open and shoots the lightsaber out, and it's a really triumphant moment. Like the audience all gets like really excited, and it's like
awesome.
Luke's got a lightsaber again. He can now do anything, and like
it's now green.
He can win any fight, and that's so cool. But you know what? That felt just like it felt like that moment in Phantom Menace when they're like, this droid's call sign is R2-D2, Your Majesty. And the audience went nuts because it's like, it's R2-D2 for real. Yes, we know it. Like, it's that fan servicey kind of, like, it's a cool moment. But when you think about it, it doesn't really drive the story forward. Like, I know they shot some stuff that they cut of Luke, like, building his lightsaber. I think I would have rather him still be working on it earlier in the movie and feeling kind of broken. Like he lost his hand. He's lost other things at this point, but like he lost his hand. All of his like ambitions seem to be tainted, and now he knows his father was Darth Vader. Like he should be much more scarred at the beginning. And he might be trying to fake it. He might be trying to pretend to be a hero, but we don't actually really get those scenes. Like we get a few scenes where he's like doing dark side things, but it's not what a broken person does.
And even then, it isn't really that dark either. Like you can
it's a
justify
choke.
it.
It's not enough of the teasing of the dark side, and it doesn't carry him.
Or the temptation of the
you
dark
never
side.
feel like he's going to lose it and go over.
Yeah.
Like it should have been a stronger like him feeling betrayed by Obi-Wan and Yoda when he actually goes and sees them again. And it should have been that he's in the earlier parts he's a little more desperate, and maybe he goes a little bit darker. Like maybe he doesn't act fast enough to save Han because of some point of jealousy over Leia or something like that.
Or
like,
he's busy killing somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Or he's distracted and he kills, he actually kills like Boba Fett in a real fight.
Right.
Or something like that. Like, those are all things that could have been done to sort of strengthen the character of Luke. Another thing in that early period, because that opening story has nothing to do with the second part besides getting Han back, is maybe Jabba is doing stuff for the Emperor. Like, they're actually finding out information about, like, what if Han dies so that they can get the information that they need to do whatever this big problem is, thus setting up something that isn't the Death Star or another Death Star, but setting up something, the base or whatever you want it to be. You can introduce it earlier on and just explain, oh my God, with those ships, they could, like, no one can oppose them, or they'll be able to create force fields that can block out all international or all interspace travel, and so every world will be cut off unless they allow people to go in and out. Set up whatever threat to like clinch
some sort of MacGuffin.
Yeah, like whatever the MacGuffin is, but set that up earlier in the movie. Have Jabba be tied to it because he's an international crime boss. He might be like smuggling like materials in or out, or providing like the right connections, or he's a trap too. I mean, that might be a little too early to introduce it, like the idea that the Empire is actively after them, but have Jabba matter to the next
completely.
part.
Yeah,
Right.
Jabba should be tied to the Empire, and that's what I was saying. Like having the Empire there with Jabba, knowing that there's going to be a Han rescue attempt,
Right.
makes a hell of a lot of sense. Like they know how important Han is to these people,
And they have the connection with them. We've already established,
and they just like, all right, whatever. Jabba has Han, and he's frozen, so I guess like nobody will ever come and get him. Like that doesn't make a lot of sense from the Empire.
At that point, the
They
Empire is
should-
too cocky.
Yeah, they should have laid a trap. That should have been an Empire trap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an obvious point.
Yeah, that's I love the idea of Luke being tempted and struggling with the dark side.
Yeah.
I even would like a fall of Luke in this movie.
Even if and it doesn't have to be necessarily like it could be he defeats Vader and he takes maybe even he strikes down the Emperor and he strikes down Vader and in the process falls. I felt like that was like I have like my theory is that's what they would have done if they did intend to do more
7, 8, 9,
movies. Yeah, that you do have this moment, or maybe he doesn't take down Vader, he takes down the Emperor, and he and Vader join forces, that he accepts him as his father, but you see the two of them continue.
And sort of this
hold on,
foolish belief of I'm going to hold on to good to upset his evil and create balance in the Force. That's
Well,
the
there
idea of
are
balance.
attachments.
I mean, we
with
do have
Luke.
to embrace the fact that this was thought to be the last movie when they were making it. Like,
That's true.
we're not
Okay.
talking about like the
Continuing
longer.
on
Yeah,
7,
this
8,
is not the
9,
modern
yeah.
world where everyone thought we'll just do like a
No,
series
but
that
like
goes
right
forever.
afterwards,
Like,
they were talking about doing 7, 8, 9. I remember as a kid thinking there was going to
well,
be
they were
a
leaking
7,
a lot
8,
of this
9.
information, but they wanted to do a wrap up movie. Like you can't argue that Return of
That
the
they would
Jedi
do
is
independent-
done as a wrap up movie. Like the fact that they might have been like, we could then start a new sequel like that carries a different story arc.
I think you could. I think you still can have him. Let's say he slays the Emperor, and he and Vader continue on, or are both alive at the end of it. Do you think that's not a
Or-
satisfying ending to that
Or
movie?
slaying Vader and takes up the
Well, the only reason I like the idea of him taking down the Emperor is that you're defeating the Empire, and you're hoping that you're bringing good out of Vader, and there's hope that there's enough good in Vader, and him with Luke together can make a change in the galaxy. That's the only reason
Here's my question:
I would go for that.
Do you think a continuing story feels like the best choice for like the franchise? Like right now, or not right now? I should say.
In
15 years ago,
1987, probably not.
Yeah, like at the time, the idea of like a trilogy that wrapped it up and here's the big win.
Yeah.
like felt very satisfying. We got to
That's true.
see this whole like.
And you already had the sort of dark ending. In the
Yeah,
last movie.
yeah, exactly. Like we're thinking in a model of doing sequels, but in the 80s. Only a few series were really starting to push into that sequel territory, and even then, a lot of those were after Jedi came out.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, like sequels weren't as big of a thing,
Right.
So doing a series like this would have been kind of just unheard of. So
Yeah,
it wasn't even in the mindset.
Yeah, but why not?
And the only
Like,
reason
if-
why I side
it-
with that is because Lucas had talked about doing those movies at
Doing
those
a
times.
9-part trilogy,
Yeah.
9-part series, and look, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, like these had become a huge money grab. So
Right.
the idea of being able to do another 3 movies and do more merchandising,
Yeah, that's true.
is a huge win. For
But
them.
let's go back to your point, Case, of
But-
wrapping up the story for a satisfying.
Yeah, if we
ending.
wanted to do the satisfying story, we have the broken, tempted warrior who we saw his big damn hero moment in the first one. We see him thinking that he's getting his shit together and being even better, and finding out that a lot of it was a lie in the second one. This one should be him coming to terms with what that means to him and what his actual code is, and like finding the unified view, like him. Which is what they do. He like says he's a Jedi, and he declares and he resists the dark side. Like that moment, I think is strong. I think it's just not earned in the movie itself. Like most of the payoff comes from the movie before.
I think having Vader survive the movie, even if he's maybe injured, I think can still work for a satisfying ending. So let's say that's still the last movie.
Let me have a rebuttal on that one.
Sure.
Because I think the fact that Vader dies does tie together that hero's journey really well for him, because he opens his quest to be a Jedi because he wants to be a Jedi like his father before him, and him finally meeting his father, realizing that he has fallen, like that whole arc, like him burning his father and seeing his Force ghost at the end, does have that like payoff of being like, I
There's
am a
some
Jedi,
cost
and
to
I've
the
actually
victory.
I'm not only being like him, I'm continuing the good in him and like redeeming him or like his own legacy and continuing it even better.
But my suggestion is Vader's still surviving and helping Luke take down the Emperor.
Did you see the Star Wars Infinity with the white Vader after he like turns to the light side and rejoins his kids?
Well, see, I'm thinking more like a Vader at that point. Let's say you do continue that story. At that point, Vader's going to have to go on trial for war crimes. I mean, he did kill
I think
a lot of people.
I think really for this story, Vader's got to die.
Yeah.
But if the Emperor has to die, or just be, but then you're just doing Star Wars again. Like if the Emperor gets away, I think the big win is important to the finale of the series.
Let me throw another idea out for you. It ends kind of in the way that we're familiar with, and with Luke's defeating both Vader and the Emperor, but in true hero's journey and sort of the idea of this being a space western or a samurai film. Oftentimes in those films, the hero is then sort of like
he has no place in
society. And he's just sort of like he just kind of wanders off, sort of disenchanted with the whole thing, and everybody's left wanting him to stay and be part of it, but he's just unable to do so.
Right.
And we're left kind of seeing Luke head out into space to kind of figure out what he's going to do to reestablish the Jedi Order.
What if he just stayed on Endor and started teaching the Ewoks?
That's an awful idea.
No, I like that. Ewok school with Luke. Because then what would happen is then when the Jedi school gets defeated, you get all of your slain Ewoks.
Well,
you haven't thought about this.
That's true. I would need that actually and I would need that scene in order to.
Kylo Ren kills all the Ewoks.
Oh, it'd be the best.
You would be the biggest
ever.
Kylo Ren fan
I
ever.
already am at the thought of it.
Like I don't know if I want to talk about it being like just like
But
Lord
Rey
of the
would have to be
Rings,
an
you know,
Ewok.
like where like Frodo isn't fit to live amongst his people anymore. Like he's seen too much. And he has to go off into another world. But he could be a man outside of his world. He doesn't have to just physically leave it. Like maybe.
But how do you?
I don't know.
How do you
It's
tell
hard
that?
to-
How do
it's
you
hard to
tell
do
that
in one movie.
story?
It's
Yeah,
hard
how
to
do you
do in
tell
one
that
movie.
exactly? How do you tell
Right.
that story in a scene or two
Right.
of like, well, Luke's just awkward now.
What?
I like the idea of him. Just
Here's the
sort of
thought.
like
What if
backing
everyone
up
thought
his
he was dead?
lightsaber and go,
What if everyone thinks he was dead, but he landed on Endor and he's living as a hermit, just like old Ben?
The problem is the title of the movie, Return of the Jedi, insinuates some sort of establishment of the Jedi Order again, and that's not really dealt with either in the way we know the movie.
that's
What if
one of the frustrations
But what if
I
it is
have.
Revenge of the Jedi?
If it's Revenge of the Jedi,
What if it's
then it
Revenge of
works.
the Jedi
Then it
and the
totally
movie
works.
Revenge
ends-
of the Jedi also needs a darker ending.
Well, if
A
it's
lot darker.
no, well, here's my thought. What if the movie ends? The rebels go off thinking they've won, but they think that Luke died when whatever this thing is destroyed, and Luke actually made it off with his dying father, and he stays with his father as he dies. Not and like then is just like left to sit there and watch, and he's like the last shot is him watching as the ships are leaving, and then like. You know, you see their like hyper trails going off in space, and he turns around and like just like walks off into the wood, and then that's the credits.
Yeah,
That's a very ominous ending, and I like it.
yeah, and it's a similar idea of him just not being
Yeah,
able to.
because he could come
to
back
be part.
on the dark side because he felt abandoned, or he could have just like gone off to be at peace now that the Jedi Order has had its revenge on the Sith for destroying them.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you
let me
this.
stop. Hold on. Not the Sith, because at this point, the only
There's
thing that's
no-
referred to the Sith
yeah.
has been the Star Wars novelization,
Yeah.
which is no one knows anything about in the real world at this point in time.
Right.
But the dark side, like the
dark side, yeah.
like the Jedi were destroyed. The last ember of the Jedi come back and destroy the things that destroyed them and made the world okay for people, just ordinary people, not Force users, to go and find their balance.
Yeah, because there's no idea truly of the bringing balance to the Force at this point either, since that's a prequel idea,
Right, yeah.
with the Chosen One prophecy. Yeah, I guess I just wish there was more play with Luke being broken and having a chance to legitimately be tempted by the dark side.
What if at the end Luke had another body part missing?
I don't think that's necessary for it. I think seeing I wanted more a chance. The reason why I like the idea of shortening the top end of it, with Jabba and the rescue of Han and all, is because I want to spend more time with Luke and Vader and the idea that Luke may even seriously consider, joining up with Vader and see that as, this is my only option. Like, especially if he sees what the Emperor is able to do. Like, if the Emperor starts taking out even more ships and he's like, you know what, Vader, I will join you, and we've got to take this monster down. I think the chance for more of that play in those scenes, or even in the lead up to the throne room scene, is something that will help legitimize the actual temptation of the dark side, because you kind of get it in just like a couple moments of rage from Mark Hamill, and not really.
Yeah, it always feels like Vader's more tempted by Luke than Luke is tempted by Vader.
Right, and I do think that Vader's turn is very well done without the nose. Even with the nose, it's not that bad in the later dubs of it. I think the Vader watching Luke being tortured is a very good scene. I don't want to get rid of that. Like there's so many good this is the thing. It's a movie that's so good but isn't quite great, that this is why it's like interesting to talk about how do you push that a little bit further, because that's a problem that a lot of movies have, and this is a great example and has the best pedigree going into it.
Right.
Like, you think about all the other, like, the great details going, like, backing it. Like, it had the huge fanfare. It had the amazing special effects. Like, the special effects in Jedi are bar none the best of any Star Wars movie yet. Like, in terms of, like, the space fights and everything. Like, it looks so much better than the CGI. And, like, J.J. Abrams did a really good job with his, but there's still just moments.
That Star battle.
The Star battle over the Death Star is so good.
Yeah.
Like, the geometry, like the physics of everything moving. Sure, it's not quite how space works, but like it still looks so good, and the ships look so good, and all those details. There's never these like puppety kind of moments in that. Like unlike Empire, where like the the asteroid field and the ships never quite feel
like
right.
The space worm.
Yeah, exactly. Like
some guy's hand in a sock.
Right.
Like Jedi is really where they're firing on all cylinders for the things that people were really counting on. So the fact that the movie hits a lot of the notes right, but not in a satisfying sequence, is the thing that bugs me about it. Like,
but that happens a lot. Like, I see that happen a lot with special effects movies, where they put so much attention and so much detail and effort into the special effects that they forget about the script. That happened. Like, well, Michael Bay is like the king of that, where he doesn't even care about plot, or plot's irrelevant. It's all about the special effects and how does it look. There seems to be like this weird balance in making big budget movies like this, where it's really difficult for directors and studios to produce a movie that is visually stunning and still able to hold itself together with a decent plot and storyline that makes any sense. And I don't know why you have to choose, but it seems like 90% of the time there's like some weird choices involved, and like, well, we really want to do this really cool special effect, and so let's just do whatever we got to do to get to that.
I think that's more true recently. I mean, I guess I don't have that many things to compare it with, in the late 70s, early 80s. But I think that's definitely true now, when you have the pressure of like, all right, well, there's not a lot of instances where people are willing to push back the release date of a movie now, and because they got to churn it out, and because the emphasis is on the big action, that often happens. But before, it was like what? It was like 3 years between every Star Wars movie. So I don't.
But there was a lot of financial pressure on Lucas to make this film. He was going broke financially, and so there was a lot, and because he had invested most of his money into Empire to get the money, to make that movie himself, and it worked really well. But there was still a lot of financial pressure on him just to get Jedi made and as quickly as possible.
True.
And he had to get the divorce, and so there wasn't, there's all sorts of reasons why you can justify the few problems that this movie does have.
Yeah, I think it's more an issue of collaboration than necessarily because of a focus more on technology. Because the thing is, we did talk about, yes, Empire's a little bit more hokey in some of those effects than before, but I think there is a very good balance of it. I look at the original, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy from Peter Jackson, and like I still look at that, and I'm still as much as those effects now look dated, I still am amazed by the attention to the detail in those effects. Combining models, combining CGI, the way they layer the CGI, and I still feel it looks better just in terms of the attempt of what they're doing and the balance of story and effects, that I still think it's better than a lot of the special effects movies that we get today.
I think what kind of sucks is that it sort of comes down to, if a movie is a fight to make, then there's actually a decent chance that everyone is working as hard as they can and like getting the things that really matter to them through. Like, I don't mean like, because there's a lot of times where you can talk about studio interference ruining a movie, like pushing something too hard, or there's a lot of times where a director has too much power. I mean, that's the prequels right there.
Right.
Like if a movie is a struggle on everyone, but that they're pushing to do the best they can and what matters most to them, like the original Star Wars is a great example. Like Lucas had to fight to get it, but he had this big vision, and that compromise and that collaboration really makes it work. Like
Same with Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, like we're talking about movies that are very difficult to make, and movies are just hard to make, and having it feel like a team effort where maybe no one's happy the time they're making it, but eventually they produce a great work. That's where you have these like really solid things versus ones where it's like, well, I really want to showcase this idea, or I really want to showcase this technology, or I really want to talk about like the time that woman cheated on me and she's a bitch. Like those are the types of movies that like fall apart, you know. Right. They might have like one glorious thing pushing them forward, but ultimately there's something missing there, and that I think that's the teamwork component of movie making. And I think Jedi is when Lucas starts having a little more control. You know, he had the least to do with Empire, and Empire is great, but he had a huge part of it. And like we all know, Star Wars was a fight from start to finish.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But Jedi is where it starts to get easier, and then later movies it's too easy.
Damn
right.
mess, yeah.
Right.
Yep. I think that there's not a lot to fix in this movie, which is great because it like you said, it's a good movie. There's not a lot to fix in it, but it's not a great movie. I love the ideas that we came up with. I hope I live long enough to see them reboot the Star Wars.
Do you think
universe.
reboot would happen with this series? Like that almost sounds sacrilegious to reboot the original Star Wars.
I don't know if it could be rebooted.
You got to wait till Lucas is dead.
I mean, I'm going to say that I don't know if it could be rebooted. Then, like, people are going to be like, "Oh, well, but there's so many examples of things that were rebooted that seem to be reboot proof, like Star Trek. Star Trek. Right. It was just like, oh, we're just going to move on to the next ship and the next crew. How about we just go back in time? Let's just go back in time.
We're just going to redo it all, baby.
Like, that might be it. They might do a soft reboot.
Yeah.
You could, and there's stuff out there. Star Wars does not have the type of time traveling stuff already built into it that Star Trek does. But it could happen. You could have the Force. You could have like waves of the Force reshape how things move, and then
or just run into a different alien race that has this technology that allows that to occur.
I like the Force idea better.
but what I mean is that Star Trek, since the first season, has had time travel in play.
Right.
Part of that was budget because they kept on having issues, and they'd shoot on the Green Acres set and other locations that were other CBS products, and that was just like a fact of life. But that meant they had time travel from the get-go.
Right,
and so they've been doing time travel. They had it in the original movies. They had it in Next Gen. They had it in the Next Gen movies. They've had it in Voyager. They had it in Deep Space Nine. Every single series of Star Trek has had time travel in play. In fact, one of the series, Enterprise, is entirely about time travel. So, like, it's a series that when they did a time travel story to, like, reboot it, it didn't feel alien to the world because literally it was, like, so ingrained in the world that time travel was a thing that nothing was betrayed.
Sense, yeah.
Star Wars, as far as I know, has never done, like, a real time travel story. Like, there have been stories in the expanded universe of things, I think. I can't even think of one off the top of my head. There's been a lot of, like, flashbacks and stuff, but I can't think of a true time travel story.
But I like the idea of, like,
using the Force.
Something such a critical moment happening
that
at some point in the future. Right.
Yeah.
Ripples through
the Force and the Force being able to see before and after, and maybe the Jedis of yesteryear see something really big. Like, it doesn't have to be something that intentionally changes time, but the Jedis of before feel the future in such its enormity that all of a sudden things start to shift and then something changes. That would be a way to reboot it that doesn't feel alien to the world that they've presented.
Or you could just reboot it.
Right.
Yeah, or you could just do a prequel and run the prequel into the timeline of the original movies.
That's true.
You could fix the prequels, run it right in.
You could
just
talk
start
to
at the
us. We can fix the prequels.
Yeah, we got episodes on it
God.
already, guys.
Okay, so anyway, here's my takeaway for when we're talking about Jedi. We think that Luke should have had a little bit more of an arc dealing with his pain and turmoil and dark side calling, whether that's him actually falling or just being more like a PTSD soldier. Like, we could kind of play around with that. We feel that Jabba should have been more tied in to things that happened later in the movie. Like, that first story arc is completely unrelated to the rest, whereas the original Star Wars has no like chaff. Like, everything is like super important to the plot of the movie. And Empire, everything sort of builds around it, but it's all part of like setting up the stakes for the end of the movie. Whereas like the opening of Jedi does not set up the stakes for the rest of the movie. We think that Han dying is an idea that could work. I don't think you have to kill him, but I think that his presence there really doesn't help or hurt the movie. That Leia being Luke's sister is dumb. And that it being the Death Star, probably a little weak. You could have done something else, and you could have made the Ewoks count a little bit more and be a little less laughable. And then if you wanted to have the big ending and wrap up the series, that's cool. Or if you wanted to set up sequels, you had plenty of material to work with.
Right.
If we were in 1983 and we wanted to make a fourth Star Wars movie, there was a lot we could have done. But if we wanted this to be the swan song of the series, there's also a lot you could do there. So I feel like we have a really good idea for how Jedi could be slightly tweaked, but like we said, it's a good movie. Well, thanks, guys. Let's wrap this up. Tune in next time. We're going to be talking about Highlander 2: The Quickening. And thanks, guys, for checking out our pilot episode.
Bye.
Until next time, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.
Well done.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
And we're back. So, Sam, that was the first official episode of Another Pass.
Yeah.
And I feel like we should talk a little bit about the growth of the format and a little bit about, does it actually hold up as a good episode of the show? Well,
I actually think that it's a very entertaining show. The three of you have great chemistry together. Cannot get down with all of the views, of course, as stated before, as my trigger warning going into this episode. Ewok hate is not a place I want to be. And but I think, like, for the most part, it's a fun episode. I think that the format that we have now is so fine-tuned, right? Like we have a discussion and we talk about it a lot, and then we kind of give our pitches, and it's very like clean. Where this is like, I felt like it was more like a room with a whiteboard where you guys were just building on stuff, kind of like tacking things like, well, what about this? Yeah, Death Stars are dumb. Yeah, they should have done this. Oh, you know what would have been cool? Oh, and what about this theory? And so it was kind of like, it was almost like you were three men in a room with a whiteboard and string. And so.
Yeah. I mean, like, because it is the first episode, like, and at this point we had a pretty good kind of routine in the main show of just like shooting back and forth ideas and really having like good energy. And then when we got into this episode, I think even more so than the prequel ones, it was like, all right, we have thoughts, but none of us have like set pitches, and we're throwing ideas and seeing what we can kind of assemble together, which is fun. And like, I there are times where I miss the episodes of the show that had more of that. Like we tend to be a bit more locked in, if only so that we keep ourselves sane, because these episodes could spiral out ridiculously
very easily. Yeah.
Especially with more people.
Yeah. I think what is also a challenge for this particular movie is, and this is said during the episode, and I totally agree with it, is that this movie is a good movie. Like, it's like a minor tweak movie. And I think even when we've done our more recent episodes, those are always like a little bit harder to do, because it's like, well, there's like minor things you can change. Like, is it the worst thing that Leia turns out to be a Skywalker? No, it's awkward. It's awkward writing, but like, it's also so part of like our cultural phenomenon now that it would be like hard for me at this point to not imagine her as a Skywalker. Or, you know, absolutely the Ewoks, because there's only one person that was right. There's Addy. The Ewoks are completely right. And honestly, there was something, one of you, I don't remember which of you said this, but they were like, why would something this small be able to defeat the Empire? And it's like, bro, that's like all of Lord of the Rings. Like this is like a tenet of fantasy. Like a tenet of fantasy is the smallest thing, the lowest person, the person that was never expected, the person who seems to pose the least risk just by having hope, just by having whatever charm, and the Ewoks are fucking charming. I don't care what anyone says. That they help to defeat forces. And so I'm going to say, like, by rule of like just basic fantasy laws, the Ewoks make total sense. And I get it. An Ewok planet, a Wookiee planet would be very cool, but Ewoks are just, they're amazing and I love them. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Ben had made a stance on Ewoks as a, like,
yes,
a running gag.
I'm aware.
At that point. So we were definitely trying to like reference that. Like, you know, considering that the show was on the same feed, we felt that we wanted to like allude to a lot of stuff that previous episodes had,
yeah.
Even though I was then the host of this particular show. On that note, so I had all these notes about Return of the Jedi when I sat down, and I knew from episode 1 that I wanted the outro to always be the next time we're talking about Highlander 2.
Yeah, I was excited.
I always knew that was how it was going to be. But in terms of where the other format bits, so I kept Stay Scruffy My Nerf Herders, and that's going to stay that way for quite a while. I think it was around like maybe episode 50, maybe even later, when I started to differentiate the outro from certain point of view, the Stay Scruffy My Nerf Herders part. And then when we actually started recording, there was like this half a moment of like, oh God, I've never introed the show before. Like where like we were sitting around a table together, and I'm just so used to like the episode starting, Addy like taking the lead to like open with like, hey, this is the show, I'm Addy Thomas, and then point to Ben Milton, and then point to me, and like we'd introduce ourselves, but Addy always like started it.
Right.
And all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay. Like there was a serious pause where it's just like, hey everyone, we're talking about Return of the Jedi today. Blah, blah, blah. Like,
well, you're a pro now, so it's fine.
Yeah. It is really funny, the repetition of certain sentences that have become very ingrained when dealing with a bi-weekly show for 6 years.
Yeah. Now you can welcome anyone.
But at this point, completely off the cuff. Like I was like, oh, yeah, all right, yeah, here's the intro. Like,
this is what it sounds like.
Yeah. But, I mean, from the beginning, we had the same intro music, which came from Vin Macri, the same outro music from Matt Brogan, and we had the earlier version of the voiceover before we added you to the show that was done by Jeff Moonen. And that part, aside from changing what he says so that it includes you, that part has remained the same, and the intro and outro music has remained the same since the beginning, and I still stand by them. I think it's perfectly fine.
Yeah. I think all of that's great. Honestly, I hope that everyone did enjoy listening to this episode. I do think that there were some really fun ideas brought up. I don't know if you guys fixed Return of the Jedi, but I do feel like there were like certain things that you brought up that were like good questions. Like why make another Death Star? I mean, in my head canon, the reason is that the Empire feels that they've won from Empire, and because they're fascists, and fascists just like to rub it in people's faces, they would build exactly what was destroyed the first time to be like, see, not only did we win, but we're going to rebuild it. That does not explain what happens in the future with new Death Stars, but that is not the point. But yeah, I thought there were some really good things we made. I hate the idea of Han dying, but it does make sense. Damn you all.
Yeah, it's so wild because this was the type of movie where it was like we all are super familiar with it, but also there's so much media that has come since it that is so tied into it all. It's like, all right, how do you divorce yourself from everything that has come since and look at it with fresh eyes from a creative perspective? And that was a big challenge for that. And like we have dealt with plenty of movies like that. Like particularly right now, we're recording this in the midst of our Planet of the Apes marathon, and that is. Like that's a lot of like, okay, so now look at the third movie and ignore the fourth and fifth. Like, don't even think that those have happened yet. Like, how are you going to approach that movie? And like, I think that's a really fun exercise because it is so difficult to do normally. Like, it is so easy to look at, here is the bulk of the franchise and everything that's added to it and taken away from it and all that, and lose the individual artistic elements in this larger like quilt that is made of each property you're looking at.
Yeah. I think two of my favorite points of this episode, though, was the conversation about Luke's trauma and not really addressing it, not really addressing what that would do to a person, because he does face this huge failure at the end of Empire, like not just physically losing a hand, but like his friend is gone. He basically failed after being the golden boy of the first one. And all three of you were right that's not really like addressed. I don't know how we address it, because the other good point that you made is that this is meant to be the wrap up movie.
Right.
and that may bring way too much story into the actual story. But I do think that it is like something like I think like, especially with something that's as iconic as Return of the Jedi, that is just one of those like, it's a fun movie. This is a fun movie overall. The idea that like, oh yeah, there are some themes that you didn't really get to explore because it like we need to wrap this up. We need to is something that I haven't really thought about. And so like I thought that those were two really great points brought up about this particular film during this episode.
Yeah, I rather like a lot of the ideas we put forth in this episode. And, like, while I did criticize an aspect of the Ewoks, mostly because there is a portion of fandom that dislikes them. And I was like, all right, how do we address that proactively? I really liked me throwing out a bunch of ideas of like, all right, well, what if they knew about tunnels, or what if they knew about this specific thing that was either incendiary or was really strong or something. And I realized actually, in retrospect, that's actually kind of like just Avatar, the Na'vi, where it's like, oh, well, they've got minerals that make their arrows like really, really strong, and they're very big, so they can shoot these like big pylons. But like where that like the natural components of the world is a reason why they're able to actually exist and rebel effectively. And I do think that could have been in the Ewoks in Jedi. I think that there could have been a few spots that would have made for visually interesting scenes that could have been used to sort of set up like more rationale for like why these cute teddy bears are so able to be an asset.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something already within like the unspoken text of making them feel like they would be hard to catch, and like also the Empire kind of looks down on most creatures as subhumans, so like leaving these little teddy bear creatures like on this forest moon like alone as long as they stay away from the base, like I could see them kind of ignoring them. But I think there's something to be said by the idea of like there's something supported even within the battles that they understand this land so much better than the Empire does, who are like these interlopers who are just taking up a space to like host the shield, right? Like, so I think like that's actually like it would be kind of cool to see them like lead, and you don't really have to do much, and have them like lead someone through, like have the rebels sneak up behind because of a tunnel or something like that. So I thought that was like good, because it's like an add-on of a scene or two that's not actually going to hurt the overall runtime of it. And like you're already in the forest knocking people over. It's just part of the action sequence in general.
Yeah. Like I said, in the episode itself, like the movie is good. So it's really just a question of how you polish it and like what things stand out to you. One thing I really miss from these earlier episodes, and that it goes away by virtue of the fact that there are multiple people and a lot of people are coming in cold to the show, is the roundup at the end, where it's like, okay, here's all the ideas we presented, and like where it's like, okay, how can we address the issues that were ultimately a part of this movie, and things that we thought could have been handled differently, and like actually tried to summarize it, which I thought was a really good way of taking all of our like pitches, but also just like general like thoughts about the movie, and like really creating like, all right, here is a finished thesis at the end of it all, of each episode. And that starts earlier and will continue for a while, and then it kind of shifts into like, all right, bring your pitch, I got my pitch, and then like, you know, it's fun when we've got overlap, but we don't really like ever try to mesh them together. And part of that is just our episodes have gotten way longer than where they used to be. And so a wrap up at the end would just add like an extra 20 minutes, and Matt would want to kill me more than they already do.
Yeah, poor Matt. Let's not do that to Matt. He's already a hero. He doesn't need to be a victim.
But on that note, this is also pre-Matt coming on the show. That happened at the start of 2020, so we were pretty well into, I think we were 3 years in at that point.
Wow.
When they fully took over doing that. So this is all me at this point. And I am learning how to use some equipment in this case, because the audio file was recorded at the quote unquote certain POV studios, which was like the studio setup that Addy had in his basement that he shared with J Mike, which was awesome. I miss those days so much, of just being like pop in, we'd record a couple of different things all in like one night, kind of like cool sessions. But that's why the audio quality was pretty good. But then once I start recording remotely with people, especially like doing sit-down interviews with a Tascam, there were some audio issues, such as a mic that was dead that I didn't realize was dead.
Oh,
and
no!
So, like, I was wearing an Omni Lav, and so oftentimes, like, like I would have everyone's audio, but I would be like, why are they so faint? Oh, that's why. So like the timelines for the first couple episodes that, particularly the ones that were not done in studio, are painful to look at, because it's so much cut audio of like, okay, here's the guest, I'm bumping them up, or here's me, because it took forever for me to realize that one was bad, and so I didn't even notice it, because I was just unfamiliar with the equipment. Tascam is like a personal recorder for people who are listening who are not like AV people. And it was an older model one that was also a problem. Also, and this obviously also not affecting this one yet. The one I had initially had like some issue where it would glitch out if the recording was longer than like 20 minutes. So I would always have to make breaks in my recordings. Like we would pause and then I'd stitch it together. So lots of technical things that were a big issue then that have not really been a factor, particularly since the pandemic, and all of it just becoming, let's do a Zoom call, record locally, it's all fine.
Yeah. And of course, Matt. I'm just going to give Matt credit.
Also Matt, yes. I mean, I had figured out my shit by the time that I passed it off to Matt, but definitely not at the beginning.
Well, and now you don't have to worry about it. You know, right. Now you just, the only real worry you have is when we go over too long and you realize that it's a monster episode for him to edit.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I am glad to get this back out there for people to listen to. I'm glad that we have a format that we can kind of re-explore some of those old episodes, because some of them were fun. And like the Jedi one, I probably revisited more often just by virtue of it being a Star Wars thing. So I've refreshed my memory on like, oh, what did I say at the time about a thing?
Do you feel like the things you said are still true for you today? Which is interesting, because now we've gotten like more Star Wars like stuff, right? Like we've gotten more shows, more stuff. I mean, not that we didn't have a lot of stuff then, but we have even more stuff. So you feel like it's still true? Like, do you feel that you feel the same?
For this one, for the most part, yes. I think that I really liked Obi-Wan, for example. I thought it did a really good job of fleshing out the conflict between Vader and Obi-Wan, and like really sort of making that relationship feel more real and feel like it had more encounters, to the point where, while I was reluctant to embrace it as a show, once I did, I was like, oh no, this actually helps a lot. I do think that a lot of the material that has been put out there has really helped smooth out the rough edges that we were looking at in Star Wars canon as of The Force Awakens coming out. Like, this is before Rogue One even dropped, or thereabouts. I forget exactly. It may have been like right after. But either way, like we hadn't really started to like flesh out the broader Star Wars canon. Like the thing I really like about the Disney era has been like we have all these actors from the prequels who can play older versions of characters that now the original actors are dead, for example, like Mon Mothma. And so that getting Bail Organa as an older man in Rogue One and then also in Obi-Wan, and like being able to like help make the prequels feel more part of this larger story as opposed to this side project that was had a very different aesthetic and just didn't feel like the first 3 Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
Like now there's more of a here's a totality of it all.
Yeah.
Like I was really into the Machete Order at this time, which is watching Star Wars in order of 4, like OG Star Wars, 5 Empire Strikes Back, then watching episodes 2 and 3, and then 6 Return of the Jedi, and looking at the movies from that perspective where you get the prequels as like a flashback in the middle. And now it's a lot harder for me to say like, oh, that's the way to watch it, because there's so much additional material that I think is worthwhile. Like where in that order would you put Rogue One? Not before OG Star Wars, because OG Star Wars is like such a great gateway for an audience into the world of Star Wars.
Right.
But would I say wait until later? I don't know. Like,
yeah,
like because Return of the Jedi is such a perfect end of like the trilogy. Or maybe not perfect is the wrong word, but like a good conclusion that I don't know if I want to mess around with that order too much. And then you get into the sequel trilogies and like The Mandalorian and Boba
There's
Fett,
so much. There's so much. Oh, Boba Fett. Oh, like, Boba Fett.
I love Tamora Morrison, but man, they like the second that Mando is back on screen, you're like, oh right, this is a stronger lead for how they wanted to handle it all. It just
I mean, honestly, the first half of that show is just it's a mess. But I don't think it's the performers themselves. I think everyone gives a solid performance. I think it's the pacing and the script and it doesn't get better till Mando shows up.
Right. Well, and also just like Boba, like Tamora Morrison comes off. Like he honestly feels like one of the other clones who's like just like a little bit nice and has done some bad things versus like Boba Fett had just had such a reputation. And clearly when we're talking about him in Jedi, like he was at one point thought to be the next main antagonist, which fucking blows my mind now like to think about. Yeah.
I mean, it is honestly, it's I feel like you like where I like how so far there's just been a lot of things that have kind of, cleaned out the edges. And I will say that Obi-Wan made me appreciate the prequels more. We all know where I stand on the prequels. I am not a fan of them. I know that the internet will say that that's not cool of me, but they're just so flawed. There are good things about them, but they're very flawed and I do not enjoy them. But I do think that Obi-Wan that show gave it meaning and actually was like, oh, like the first kind of like a sequence that's edited in that kind of like gives you like a before for like what the prequels were to sum it up for you. I was like, man, if the movie was just that, if those movies were just that would have been so amazing. Like I was just like, maybe I should go rewatch them. And then I remembered when I tried to rewatch it because we talked about them and I was like, no, they took the best parts and they edited it the best way. But it was so good. It was so good. And I think that, I think that the right now, the team that's working is doing really nice work to try to tie everything as much as they can together to smooth out the rough edges on all of the movie projects, And so kudos to them. I hope it continues. I hope knocks on wood.
Yeah. That is a franchise that it's so interesting to look at. Every phase of my life, there has been like some major shift in it in the way that we see it as a whole. Like there was the era of like, oh, George Lucas was such a genius for everything he created. Like that sort of like that idolizing phase that occurred in like the 90s leading up to like the remastered editions and then the special editions. Like because like they did like THX, like all the sound has been topped off and like the film grain has been removed, like refinements first, and then they did the actual like the special editions in theaters, and those had their own kind of like a lot.
Yeah,
I was probably the target demo for like, here's all this like extra shit that we're putting on screen for
Mm-hmm.
that era, where it's like, look, with computers we can like see into the cockpits of the jets, and then, like, you know, we can do all the things, and those like really cool, and it was like really cool just to see Star Wars on screen again, and that corresponded with like the Shadows of the Empire kind of push that occurred around that time, and then you get to the prequels, and the prequels are like, look, like, hey, there's new Star Wars to check out. Oh my god, I can't wait. Like, I remember all of us like picking apart the first trailer and like my freshman class of high school, like the trailer had come out and we're all like, oh my god, were those Mandalorians that were being dropped down? They were the drones,
right?
Like the battle droids. But at the time, like when it's just a quick shot, we're like, are those shock troopers being like dropped off for combat? Like, is, you know, what? How does this fit in? Because like that era had been so verboten in like this extended universe, and so all of a sudden like the prequels are coming out, and each one we're like, yeah, this is fucking great, and then like the movie is no longer in theaters. We're like, was it great?
Yeah.
Never mind. And each one was like, oh, this one's finally the good. Like 2 was like, this one's finally the good one, and then we're like,
Oh,
never
no.
mind. Then 3 comes out, oh, finally a good one.
I mean, for me, for my money, 2 is the worst of those 3, and I stand by that.
I don't know if I fully disagree or agree. I think the points I made on the actual episode of that, I think I generally stand by, especially because some of those were refined for doing this exact thing.
Yeah.
And it was only like a year ago that we did those. So, you know, like the thing that is interesting now is that we have had The Force Awakens, and we've had the whole like sequel trilogy, and we've had all the Clone Wars TV shows, and we've had the live action TV shows, and all of these things that have added to the canon of Star Wars in a way that's like more directly part of Star Wars than like the extended universe stuff, because that was like mostly books and comics, and it just felt like, while it was at the time considered canon, and now the new extended universe novels are considered canon, like they're still a totally different medium, versus like the shows are literally using the same actors, so those like feel much more like an authentic part of Star Wars and how we look at Star Wars. Either way, it's just interesting to be like, oh well, like now my perspective of Star Wars is this much more sprawling series of projects that I can't delegitimize anything as much as I used to. Like, I used to be like, all right, well, just look at the main movies. Don't look at the prequels. But now, like, I can't really look at the main movies and not the prequels without, if I want to incorporate, like, Andor or Rogue One or Obi-Wan or any of the sequel trilogy stuff. Like, it's become so much bigger as what is like the canon, and thus the highs don't feel quite as high to me anymore, but the lows also don't feel so low.
I can see that. I still say the second one's the worst of the prequels. No, I
mostly agree. It just has the more necessary story beats than the first one, and so it's the challenge of like, well, which one's more important first, which one is better done.
Well, my indictment of it is that it should have had more beats, because I feel like the third movie then has too much heavy lifting, which I said when we did our thing, and I stand by that. I just feel that the second movie was the movie of promise, and it let me down wholly. I know, maybe it's just like what my expectations for movies that are going to be trilogies. Thank you, Empire Strikes Back. The second movie should be the best movie.
But I feel like we're getting away from the Jedi.
We are totally, and this is what happens when we talk about Star Wars. So let's get back on track.
Yeah, well, I think what I would say, looking back at this one specifically, is that it's surprising from this perspective 6 years later of how much was in place at the get-go, and then how much you can hear me kind of still figuring out how to do a podcast myself, as opposed to being a guest on a podcast. And it's cool, and it's like cool to be like, oh yeah, I actually had my shit together, which I can't get over.
Yeah, you sound really good. Like, I know that you feel like you were flying off the sea of your plants, but like, honestly, like even your intro, it didn't feel like it was just something that you realized, like, oh no, I've got to speak now.
Yeah, that's
Sounded
because
fine.
we clipped out the like 10 seconds of us just like looking around at each other and then being like mouthing the words "you."
Well, no one would know, except now they do because we talked about it.
Yeah, I miss I miss that era of certain point of view where it felt like it was this like little like studio project that we were all doing together. And because like now that we're all recording for the most part with like Zoom calls, and a lot of that was the pandemic, but also a lot of that was like certain point of view shutting down as like the flagship show, and Ben and Addy sort of like going off and doing their own things for a while. Like it's just an era I miss. It was a lot of fun, and it felt really creative and cool, even if it was just like three guys sitting around a table bitching about Star Wars.
And that's all that matters, really. That it felt cool.
It was definitely very invigorating because like for me it was like I had moved from New York and I didn't have anything that was like a creative project, and like my last couple of years in New York I didn't really have like a creative project either. Like I'd been doing theater and screenplay stuff and just working on random things for like the first like 6 years I lived in New York, and then like the last two I was just trying to get by. Like I was like barely making enough to pay rent and like couldn't like I couldn't do a whole lot. And then I moved back to DC to take care of my grandfather, and it was like, oh, I've got nothing that's like I got a job relatively quickly, but I didn't have anything that was like, here's my creative project. And then certain point of view like popped up on my radar, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, here is a thing that I can do, and like do in a way that was manageable for my schedule and keep putting stuff out.
Right.
Because we had just wrapped up the last the normal Farragut movie at that point, and that while it was a lot of fun to do, like it was arduous, and like it took like 5 years for us to like get the edit done because it was just a big project. And
Right.
like there was drama, and like I didn't want to be like super in the weeds on some of that because it wasn't a thing that it wasn't my baby. And then here, this was a thing I could be like, oh, I own this. Like I feel this is my show. And this came out at the same time as Nerf Herders. So both of those spinoffs were like, cool, I can do both of these things, and they're really fun, and they're like getting different itches that scratched that I needed. So it was really invigorating, and it's fun to look back on that first episode and be like, fuck yeah, I can do this.
Yeah. And we're so glad you felt that way, because now it's been 4 years later.
Six
Years later. Gosh darn it.
It was 4 years when you came on.
Right. 6 years later. Maybe I've just rebooted everything. No, it's been 6 years later. It's a time loop. That's Star Trek.
Yeah, we've had so many episodes that podcast players make it difficult to see these episodes, which is like a wild thing on a show that only comes out once a week, or once every other week, pardon me.
Yeah, I had to go to our website because none of the things I used to play podcasts would play it. So I went to the podcast site to listen to this. If you go to
the base Libsyn page, you can eventually scroll to it. But yeah, podcast apps just wouldn't load this far back. So now it's like, oh, cool. All right, well, let's get these back out there, because they I think while there are technical issues and there are format issues that are being developed as we go, it's still worthwhile, and like it's cool to see, and this is just bonus content anyway, so it's not like we're taking anything away from our audience. So
right,
I hope you all enjoy.
Absolutely, me too.
But yeah, so like I said, this is on our off weeks, so we, as of when this dropped, it's kind of going to depend on how quickly I get this out. Either this is between episode 150, which is our Planet of the Apes spectacular finale, or this is one after that.
Which I'm sure will also be spectacular, just a different movie.
So next week will be another regular episode of the show. But then the week after, the next one of these will drop, which will be going to our second episode, which will be Mallrats, which we will be talking about more format stuff. We'll be talking about some technical stuff. It's also a fairly short episode, so I think that will be fun for everyone to look back at, and that's with Jeff Moonen. So I am
Yay, Jeff!
excited to re-explore that one. But you know, I'm just glad that this is still going strong.
Me too, and I'm glad to be part of it now.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you're here. Like, God, can you imagine how much better that episode would have been if you were in the room with us?
Just being like, Addie's right. Ewoks are great. Shut up, Ben. I don't even want to be here anymore. Knock everything down. No, I probably would have just been like, well, what about Frodo? What about Merry and Pippin? They didn't matter. They didn't marry because Merry and Pippin really changed the fate of the war. Without them, there would have been no Ents. Oh, you were saying that Ewoks are not as good as Merry and Pippin, and that would have been my like bothering Ben point of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for old time's sakes, I hope everyone stays scruffy, my nerf herders. And if you enjoy the show, pass it on.
Absolutely. Stay scruffy, y'all.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.